Game of Thrones is one of the greatest shows ever to be produced, so I thought that House of the Dragon will live up to the expectation and serve the book well, but I'm not really sure about neither of those two. The House of the Dragon covers only a very small portion of the book, 77 pages in the first season and only 44 pages in the second one, which makes it painfully slow to watch. This is how much the show covered from the book, so it is not much. The book is written from the perspective of an Archmaester who collected historical texts to tell us the biography of the Targaryen bloodline. And it begins with Aegon the Conqueror, who takes over Westeros. There are 4 kings that sit the throne in total until we get to Viserys' reign, which is the beginning of the House of the Dragon series. There is a lot of betrayal, killing, and interesting stuff that happens before the section that is portrayed in the series. But in this video, let's start with the beginning of the show. Now, I enjoyed season 1 much more than I did season 2. It felt much closer to Game of Thrones quality, and the second one was kind of disappointing and very slow. First of all, I really liked what they did with Alicent and Rhaenyra's friendship. In the book, Alicent is older and she's not Rhaenyra's friend. They first interact when Alicent becomes Viserys' wife, and they hated each other from the beginning. The fact that the show complicated their relationship created a much more in-depth emotion between them, and that was a very nice touch in my opinion. Also, Daemon is one of my favorite characters, and yes, he's portrayed as being somewhat of a despicable character, but also kind of likable, at least for me. Especially close to the end of the book, he does some impressive things that showcase his morality and his loyalty. This hasn't yet happened in the show though, so we're not going to talk about it. But the series really added to his cruelty when they made him kill his wife to be able to marry Rhaenyra in the first season. I really like this kind of twisted characters. Joffrey from Game of Thrones was also a character I really enjoyed, even though I was kind of disgusted by him. I didn't have a lot to criticize in season 1, to be honest. The pace was quite decent and it didn't feel as low as the second season did. Up until this point, I felt like the characters were quite well rounded, but when season 2 started, I wasn't so sure about it. Some characters portray this attitude that doesn't really suit their rank or their social status. I'm referring to a few, but Mysaria, the Witch of Harrenhal, and even Kristen seem to be superior and full of themselves to the point that it feels a bit artificial. In Game of Thrones, there were certain low-born characters that worked their way up and became deceiving and superior in a more exciting way. Maybe due to the writing style, the book doesn't present these characters in depth enough for us to get a sense of this unbased extreme superiority, but it seemed like somewhat of an unpleasant discrepancy between the book, the series, and the Game of Thrones show. Not only some characters feel shallow, but the world itself seems small. Unlike Game of Thrones, where I even felt a bit overwhelmed by how vast the universe of the story is. I felt like the book managed to create a more holistic view of the map. Joffrey in Game of Thrones had much more appeal to him. As cruel as he was, I liked the character so much because it made me feel something towards him. Obviously repulsion, but I was really invested in his story. Whereas with Aegon II, that didn't really happen. When Aemon relieved his mother Alicent from her role in the council, I felt like the emotion was lacking from that scene. I don't know, maybe it is just me, but I feel like there is not enough build-up or emotion between the characters. On the other hand, there were a few things that I absolutely loved about the show. The series added some very nice twists to the plot, and that made it so much more interesting and full of suspense. In the book, Aemon doesn't really try to kill his brother. Yes, he enjoys the attention and wants to get all the merits for killing his foes, but he didn't try to kill his brother. In the show, the fact that he almost killed his brother was such a great plot twist. I liked it so much. It really added to the conflict and made it much more interesting. And when I was reading the book, I was actually wondering why isn't his brother trying to kill him already, you know? Because it made much more sense to be this way. When it comes to the characters, I like Daemon and Aemon the most. I don't know why, but I tend to appreciate negative characters. I just like the bad guy. For example, Homelander. I love Homelander. He is my favorite character from The Boys. Also, what is going on with all the mewing in the show? When it comes to all the special effects and the dragons, I can't even begin to tell you how mesmerized I am by how everything looks and by how dynamic the dragon fights are. I am just amazed by how good everything looks. I absolutely love this about Game of Thrones and the House of the Dragon. The quality is just in a different league. I don't think there is any other show or movie that compares to it in this regard. Even though the visuals are outstanding, the show kind of lacks soul, if I can say that. It doesn't really feel like you're immersing yourself in this fantasy world. It is rather a more dynamic presentation of what each of the characters is doing. That might be only my opinion though. But here we can argue that the book is exactly that. A person who is the Archmaester that is presenting us what each of the characters is doing in a more of a biography style of writing, which I believe gives the book a certain feel to it that is very enjoyable. But that was not the intent of the show, nor would have it worked to be. At some point I grew bored with it and I felt like the episodes were too long, which never happened with Game of Thrones or with season 1. Only one Game of Thrones episode covers about 100 pages of the book, while the entire season 2 of House of the Dragon covers roughly 40 pages of the book. This comparison should give you a pretty good idea about the pace of the show. I didn't get bored with the book though, except maybe the last 50 pages, which I barely got myself to read. And that probably happened because I was very invested in Jaehaerys' reign and the Dance of the Dragon, so the aftermath wasn't really important for me. But still, it was a very engaging 700-page book. Also, when Daemon took over Harrenhal, the show made it too long and way too boring. I got the idea from the first 2 scenes about his hallucination and I understood what's going on, so we can move on. The scene where the dragon chooses a bastard rider on its own was way too much. It didn't make sense at all. Why? Adam would have been as cool or impressive of a character if he would have taken a dragon as everyone else did and as it happened in the book. A dragon searching and choosing his rider was way too forced. Especially because it happened at the most convenient time. I'm really disappointed at how they wrote this part, because it might be very impressive, but it takes me out of the story for it to be so forced. Again, compared to the book, the timeline is a bit off. Only Adam gets his dragon by the end of the season, and his brother Alan isn't a dragon rider yet. In the book, they both became dragon riders at the same time. That didn't really bother me at all. On the other hand, I really like that the show focused on how the Velaryon bastards felt about their father. With Ulfwhite and Hugh Hammer, the book portrayed them as being really bad persons, right? While in the show, Hugh is a good man up until now. I like the complexity they brought to the characters, but I'm waiting to see how the story will unfold to fit what happens in the book. Another focal point for comments and opinions was the kiss shared by Rhaenyra and Misery. And I kind of get the question mark around this scene. When did they get such a deep connection? Am I that emotionally ignorant that I didn't pick up a sign? I felt like the relationship didn't really have a reason to happen. It was out of the blue, really. Maybe they wanted to emphasize that Rhaenyra doesn't need a husband, but that is being shown throughout the entire plot, so I'm not really sure about it. I absolutely love the scene in which the young Lord of Riverrun humiliated Daemon. I was very invested in that scene, but unfortunately it didn't really affect the storyline. When I was watching that, I was all giggly and waiting to see what's going to happen. So one of my favorite scenes in the show. In the final episode, a few things happened that are also present in the book, but are all mixed up. Like Aegon fleeing the city because he was afraid his brother was going to kill him, while in the book, he was afraid Rhaenyra was going to take the throne. That's why he left the city. My biggest issue or disappointment was that the show was kind of boring. I actually didn't really want to watch the final episode today because I am watching Better Call Saul at the moment and I am much more invested in what happens there. The pace is slow and a lot of things that happen seem somehow non-significant. I'm not sure why I feel that way though, because a lot of things are very important, but they don't feel like that. I liked the book a lot, and I also liked the first season a lot. But with the second one, the most important thing was that I was not eager to see each episode whenever it came out, which kind of says a lot. If I were to compare House of the Dragon with Game of Thrones, which is inevitable, then yeah, House of the Dragon didn't live up to the expectations. But the book and the show are very different. I would say that the show is a different viewpoint of the same story that was portrayed in a more holistical way in the book, and in a completely different style, which is also very important. I can't get over the fact that the show added some very interesting twists. And for that, I'm going to say that I liked it as a whole. But I did expect more. Tell me in the comment section, what do you think about the House of the Dragon compared to the book? Also, do you like it more than the Game of Thrones? Thank you for watching, and if you want to see more content on books, you can check out my reading playlist.